right with you. All right, good morning. Good morning. I know it's Friday. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for showing up on a Friday. We have a lot to get to today. Our first exam is on Monday, and we'll cover chapter 1 only, and we'll get to chapter 2 as soon as we finish the exam. If you read ahead to chapter 2, that's good. You're ahead of the curve, but we will, because there's so much about the sociological perspectives in chapter 1, there'll be 40 questions on just chapter 1 and the sociological perspectives, which is all part of the same chapter. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later. About Monday. If you're here now, I'm not worried if you're on time, but please be on time. There's a 10-minute grace period, unless you have a doctor's note or something that supports why you had a medical family emergency, you will receive a 0, so please be here on time. Even better, be here early. Right? Think of college exams as job interviews. You have a job interview, you're not going to show up right on time, you're going to show up 5 or 10 minutes early, right? So please be on time. Please go to the, I hate to bring this up, but please go to the bathroom before the exam starts. I think I gave you my analogy on why I don't like students leaving the room during exams and all that. Okay, and it'll be in this room at our regularly scheduled time. Any questions about the schedule? Okay, we have a lot to get to make sure that you're prepared for exam 1. So we just got finished talking about Herbert Spencer, correct? Who can explain what his theory of social, what his idea of social Darwinism was? Yeah. Individual achievement, and what does that have to do with Darwin? Yes. Correct. Correct. He was thought to be related to Darwin. He liked Darwin's ideas of natural selection, and he adapted them to society. But remember that really important, yes?
He wanted people to earn their way up, and he didn't want the government to assist them, right?
Correct. That's the really controversial part of it, right? That's why there's a sort of a controversial connotation to social Darwinism. The idea that the government should not interfere with what he called the natural order of things, which makes sense in the bottom of the sea where there's a food chain and plankton and all that kind of stuff, and no one worries about every day like 80 species, I don't quote me on that number, but like 80 species of living things become extinct that we don't even know about unless you're a biologist. But that wouldn't be cool if it's, a lot of people don't think it would be cool if it was part of society, right? It's not. A lot of people don't think it's the same thing Darwin. What was the pressure that Darwin was facing to perhaps think about things in this way or write about things in this way? Yes?
The royal family wanted him to write things that would justify them having as much power as they do.
Justify, right. Their place in the hierarchy. Okay, any questions about Spencer? All right, so now we talk about Durkheim. Durkheim was one of the big 3 in sociology. Who were the other 2? Who? That makes sense, but he's not really, I understand why you would say that, but he's not considered. What's that? Max Weber and Karl Marx, right? We can argue with it, maybe it makes more sense, but in the literature, it's Marx, Weber, and Durkheim. Okay? So, Durkheim, a structural functionalist, as you know, because we went over the list of those who were in each sociological perspective, established, wanted to continue developing the credibility of this new discipline. It was, Comte just got it off the ground, Spencer helped move it along, but now Durkheim wants to give it even more credibility. In many ways, of the big 3, Durkheim is considered to be the most scholarly. He was born in a very religious household. His family was very religious. He was born into a family that many of the men became rabbis, committed their life to religion, and he was going in that direction. But when he got an opportunity to become the first professor of sociology in the first sociology department in France, he thought that was a great opportunity. He was very well qualified for it. So he wanted to use this position to further develop sociology. And he believed that the way to do this was to establish sociology through research. And in research, as we will talk about and you read about in chapter 2, there are very specific methods that are very open to those who read the research and provide credibility through the methodological principles. Okay. But again, this is all basically. Oh. He argued that these findings, the research findings, because they were so ethical and methodologically sound, should be treated just as seriously as any other findings in the natural sciences or the natural world. But there had been no real field research in sociology up until that point. You can think of Comte as the architect of sociology in many ways. He never went out and did actual research. What was this topic of the study that Durkheim did in the first major field research, field research in sociology? What topic did he cover? Yes. Suicide. Correct. We're going to go through this reasonably quickly, but if you have questions, stop me. But I just want to make sure we get through everything. This is going to be on you. And again, this is from the reading. There he is, in case you're looking for it. Okay. So the topic that he selected was suicide. Bless you. This is the, sort of the end of the 19th century, and World War I was going on. Industrialization was taking place. The Industrial Revolution was bringing more wealth to more people. Lots of things were going on in the world, but he was curious about why, if more people had wealth and free time because they weren't working on farms, were suicide rates going up? He was puzzled by that. So that's why he wanted to study it. And there's the book if you look. Any questions? Again, let's start with chapter 1. So the first topic is, the topic that he selects for the first field research in sociology is suicide. He's curious about why rates are going up, even though things are better in many ways in the world, but he's also curious about what the war is doing in terms of suicide. So he hypothesized, and we'll talk a lot more about hypotheses in chapter 2, that rates of suicide are influenced by one's religion. So he's brought up in a very religious household. He decides not to formally go into a religious occupation or commitment, but the principles and the social institution of religion is never really lost. So he believes that the more communally one place. Now remember, he's a structural functionalist. Structural functionalists are interested in social integration, interconnectedness, all those things that we talked about. That's why you have to understand the principles of these perspectives. He believes the more communally one prays, the more socially integrated someone is, the less likely they would be to commit suicide and vice versa. And he studies this, right? Because this is, again, a field research project. It's real research. And he discovers that certain religions pray more individually, and certain religions pray more communally. For example, he found that Catholics pray very communally, right? They get together with other people, they do things after services, there's much more of a religious community. And then there's a range, and then the other end of the range are like Protestants, and they pray very individually. So he's curious about, this is a hypothesis, and whether this would be proved out by the research. He was also interested not only in the probabilities of suicide, but he was also interested in the types of suicide. I'm going to go over those. Any questions? Any questions? Again, all this is laid out. Yes?
Did he only focus on the Western time, or
No. He looked at a lot of people. He was very comprehensive. That's why it gained so much credit. He really did a lot. He looked at health records and all kinds of things. But yeah, it's a good question. No, he looked at it. And this is what he came up with. We'll go over this, just to sketch it out. So there's two dimensions to his study. The two dimensions are regulation and integration. And 4 types across 2 different dimensions. So we'll start at the top. He believed that there were people, when he did his research, who were so socially integrated. I guess I don't have my pen. Oh, maybe you're good. So we'll start here. It's not perfect, but you get the idea. What does the word altruism mean? Yes? Do things for the greater good. So we believed that there were people that were integrated into their communities, into their families, so much so that they were willing to die for their cause, for their family, for their religion, for whatever the greater good they believed would be. So one dimension is integration, how socially integrated people are. And he thought that in some cases there was suicide that was based upon doing things for the greater good. But he also looked at integration on the other end of the range. Oh, there it is. Analysis. So, all right, I'll just have to explain it this way. So, on the other end is egotistic suicide. Egotistic suicide means committing suicide because people are so socially disconnected. Right? There's not enough social integration. So when he looked at these cases of people who had died and there were circumstances that were clear, he found that some people committed suicide in what he called egoistic suicide because they were so, so socially disconnected. Some people that had too much integration, some people had not enough integration. So this might be someone, in the military, who the old stereotype, jumped on a hand grenade to protect all the rest of the people in his command. And on the other end, it might be somebody who just has no family anymore, they have no friends, they're socially disconnected, and they just choose to end their life. Those are both types of suicide on the integration dimension. And that makes sense because Durkheim was a structural functionalist. Any questions about the first two types? The second dimension, which I really wish I could find, the second dimension is regulation. Now, what that really means is a degree of constraint, but I will tell you a good way of remembering this, and you should write it in the notes, is the degree of certainty about one's future. The degree of certainty about one's future. The degree of certainty about one's future. So, fatalistic suicide is when people are so certain about what's going to happen to them that they choose to end their life. Maybe they've been captured in the military, maybe they have a terrible disease, something like that, and they really feel like they know what their future is going to be. They're very certain about their future, and they don't want to see it happen. And the last type, where there's not enough regulation, not enough certainty about one's future, is called anomic suicide. Now that term anome, if you just change the C to an E, just put a little line through the C and make it an E, is a term that you should have read about in the chapter. What does anome mean? It's a French word. Yes? Correct, you have the right definition. A simpler way of thinking about it is a disorientation as a result of rapid social change. A sense of disorientation as a result of rapid social change. So we found that there were people that were so disoriented because things were changing so rapidly that they did not want to continue their life. And this goes along with the Industrial Revolution, people moving from the farms to the factories. Question? Oh. And they just couldn't handle the change. So not enough regulation, not enough certainty about one's future, too much certainty, fatalistic suicide. 2 dimensions, 4 types. Any questions? You okay? Kind of hard to see the board with your hands over your face. Any questions? Yes?
Do you think that these types of suicide still apply to today's society?
Almost everything suicide is based upon psychological factors. This person is depressed, this person is whatever. This was the first time that social conditions. So there's more social conditions. So yeah, it was still, you could still do it, but it was probably some other stuff. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Any questions before we move on? Other questions? Okay. Yeah, we'll just go. Well, you know what, I'll give you one example. Yeah, okay, this is a good visual. So, just in the interest of time, this is a real event. This is just an example of altruistic suicide, or an attempted altruistic suicide. This is 1981. You guys remember 1981? No, probably not. Ronald Reagan is here, and he had just been elected president. He's at he's giving a speech at a hotel back in this direction, and he comes out, and a guy named John Hinckley is waiting pretty much where you are, just in the degree of space. No, both of them, either one, right? Got about that close, somehow got past Secret Service, had a gun on him, fires off 6 shots in 8 seconds, or 8 shots in 6 seconds or something, hits James Brady, the press secretary here. You see this guy running over here. Reagan is getting shoved into the limousine by the Secret Service. One of the bullets does hit the limousine, and it ricochets and hits Reagan in the chest, and if you know anything about history, he almost died, but they did get the bullet out, and he was, you know, he lived in his 90s. But the person, so everybody's running or diving, and what's this guy doing? He's taking 3 bullets for the president. He literally took 3, and it happened so fast. I'd show you the video, but it happened so fast you almost can't see it. But if you look at what he does here, he gets into a position where he's trying to, he's willing to, because of his commitment to his country and his job and his, you know, cause, he was willing to die for his cause. And had he died, this would have been an example of altruism. Now he lived and he recovered and he was back at work a couple months later, and then he became the head of, he's still alive as far as I know, he became the head of some Pennsylvania police force, and you know, everything was fine. But had he died and he was willing to do that, that would have been an example of altruistic suicide. Is everybody clear about that? He had no other reason to want to die that day. Yes?
Would people suicides like fall under all this, like Jonestown or the
Well, Jones,
like the
yeah, I mean, Jonestown's a very complicated situation. I actually teach a course in cults and new religious movements, so that's the only reason I laugh. It's a very complicated situation. Yeah. Although they didn't think it was suicide. They thought they were going to a spaceship. Yeah. When you think, well, but you see, he did it for the greater good. If you're just trying to make your life better, that's not really doing something for the greater good. Does that make sense? Okay. But you're on the right track. We're actually going to talk about Heaven's Gate, and get deviants. Okay, any questions? All right, so we already went over this. Okay, here's the findings. So he does this study, very comprehensive analysis, lots of very clear methods that he discloses, and this is what he finds out. The lower rate amongst Catholics and Protestants, his hypothesis was confirmed. And again, the belief is that Catholics tend to pray more communally, Protestants tend to pray more individually, and that seemed to have an influence. Second, suicide was less common amongst women than men. Didn't seem to be a particular reason for it. Maybe a maternal issue, but didn't seem to be but that was a finding. Suicide was more common amongst single people than those who had some kind of relationship. That did follow his ideas, because the more socially integrated you are in a relationship, less likely to commit suicide. Question. Remember the first rule of the syllabus: do not get me sick. He also found that suicide was less common amongst those who had children. Made sense according to his hypothesis. And the one that I mentioned before in terms of the relationship to the First World War, that was sort of going on, or eventually ending in 1918, but it was going on, yeah, right up until the time of his passing, was that this was a precursor, a early discovery that would lead to more research about PTSD. That there was suicide was more common amongst soldiers, but it was more common during peacetime and war. So it seemed to be some delay. So very comprehensive set of findings. This book that he wrote is very well respected, and sociology continues to gain credibility. Any questions? Okay. Yeah, all right, a little bit more. Based upon what we saw in the data, as I mentioned to you before, the argument suicide can be caused for the first time, or acknowledged by the first time, there will be social factors, not just individual psychological ones. Which makes sense. That's usually what happens in research. More dimensions are added over time. We're going to talk a lot more about Durkheim in other ways, but for now, I think that's what we'll talk about in chapter 1. So Durkheim is the first of the big three. Okay, everybody good? Everybody good? Marx. We could spend an entire semester talking about Karl Marx. Marx was a conflict theorist. He helped establish conflict theory, and therefore his ideas were essentially the opposites of that of Durkheim. Durkheim believed that social order was maintained through consensus. Remember we discussed structural functionalism being referred to as consensus theory? But in the mind of Marx, conflict, he examined conflict in society. And we know that conflict theory says that how is social order maintained? How is that the opposite of this? Yes? Domination by those who
Have more power.
have more social resources, including political and social power. So it's really a very different view and gets into the whole issue of, and that's why we talk about Marxism and feminism being some of the components of conflict theory. He discussed idealism and materialism. Communists believe that idealism is the better way for society to exist because there will be no conflict or be less conflict. But he looks at society through what he describes as the materialistic conception of history and blames capitalism and economics specifically as the driving force for social change and conflict in society. Because if there is excess, if there is surplus, people will not have the same amount of resources. Saw a picture, this is just an aside. I don't know how many of you follow this kind of stuff, but there was a parade in China, I believe, a day or two ago, and there's this picture of Putin and Xi and Kim, right? 3 communists. But the real communist was Xi. Did anybody know why? I mean, you didn't see the picture, I could show it to you. But Xi made a statement that he was the real communist because Putin's wearing a very expensive suit, and Kim's wearing a expensive outfit, and Xi is wearing a very bland, typical communist outfit that kind of fits in. I don't get anything different than everybody else. He was making a communist statement by just wearing this basic outfit instead of something very fancy. So that's kind of the issue. According to Marx, capitalism creates conflict because the rich exploit the poor, exploitation, which have no benefits, and the poor seek ways to overcome that exploitation. So that's the conflict in his mind. We still talk about Marx today, even though he would not have agreed with our economic system or very much about our system in general. And we acknowledge that he was responsible for an ideology that probably cost the world tens of millions of lives in the Bolshevik Revolution and lots of other totalitarian regimes. But his ideas were very prolific about a lot of different things. He wrote about sociology, society, he wrote about law, he wrote about philosophy, and had a lot of interesting ideas, even though they were very difficult to read. His prose was very difficult to read. Any questions? Okay. Almost everything here is in your textbook. This part of the lecture is almost identical. So, just going to move it up for now. Much more about Marx coming up. Weber, the last of the big three, Marx, Weber, Durkheim. You raised the question, what about Comte? Comte was a leading figure in sociology, but for whatever reason, the scholars who evaluated these things thought it was Marx Weber. It's Weber, not Weber. Weber lives into the 20th century. I mentioned to you earlier in the course that he's technically associated with which sociological perspective? Technically. Yes? No. What did I say he was associated with? Thank you. You have an exam on Monday, so we can keep track of it. Yes? Symbolic interactionism. But, as we'll talk about, he was involved with many other things. So, like Marx, Weber was interested in capitalism. Like Durkheim, Weber was interested in religion. And he writes a book that has references to religion and capitalism in the title. What was the name of the book? Now we'll know whether you did the reading and brought in notes. What book did Weber write that has elements of religion and capitalism right in the title? Did I mention you should read ahead and read this? Oh, yeah. Okay. What was the name of that book? Well, I said some people make in the 30s and 40s. Oh, wait. Somebody gets it, you know, if we get it. What book did he write that had elements of capitalism and religion in the title? Maybe Jeopardy music. This is somebody. Yes. No, it has a title. Access to you. Thank you. We're gonna put it up, we're gonna go, oh, that's right. Usually these kind of books are bold-faced and everything in the chapter. No one wants to help us out? You got it.
The Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism.
The Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. Where did you find that? In the textbook? Thank you. A lot of these notes are posted in the textbook. We've just refuted the null hypothesis. We proved that it could be done. So he writes in this book, one of the most important works in modern sociology, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Again, not an American contribution yet. Weber was German. He argues that certain aspects of Christian beliefs and practices influenced the early success and development of capitalism. Why did he get off to such a strong start? Why is it the dominant form of economics in the world, even if people don't love it? Because of the, well, I'm going to show you our first short video of the semester to help you with that. But of course, it's explained to you. Again, this is right out of the textbook. Back to the 100 and something students took that long for one person to find it is a little concerning. Oh, no, it's back. You may or may not see it. Oh, there it is. Okay, I got it. Oh, look. Oh, I see it. It's black and I can't see it in the background. Okay, everybody ready? Hopefully we got sound in. Oh, I got it. Remind me not to write on the screen anymore. It's necessary. I got it. No. Oh, yeah. Here we go. These are short this time. There we go. All videos are important, so please pay attention if you have them. You know.
Those who pursue religion often turn away from worldly affairs. They're suspicious of wealth and business, preferring an ascetic life of contemplation and prayer. The sociologist and economist Max Weber argued that after the Reformation, one form of Christian Protestantism, Calvinism, encouraged a different attitude to work with far-reaching effects. Calvinists believed in predestination. A precise number of souls would go to heaven. The lucky ones had places reserved by God. However, most Calvinists were terrified there would be no seat awaiting them in paradise. They were always on the lookout for signs that they had been saved. One clear indication that they were on the guest list was that they were actively contributing to their community through their work. In his book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, Weber argued that the Calvinists' need to reassure themselves through their industry was an important factor in the growth of capitalism in Northern Europe. They built up businesses that generated wealth, but at the same time lived thrifty lives. They reinvested any surplus and so helped fuel capitalism. Eventually, capitalism would have a life and momentum of its own, but according to Weber at least, its initial impetus came from a theological source.
Okay, who'd like to summarize what we just saw? We usually have a good answer. How about someone else? Yes.
Julie's book actually basically stated that. Basically stated that capitalism basically found its roots in theology, saying that people turn away from worldly values. However, there was a certain amount of people that make their way to heaven, basically that knowledge of Calvinism. So the people who, I guess, were wealthy will put their resources back to society, which helps the growth of capitalism.
Good. Calvinism is part of Protestantism, right? So we study Protestants for a number of reasons. One is there's a lot of Protestants in the world, even today, right? And when we look at religion later, we'll see. Of all Christian groups, Protestants are the largest group, right? Just by sheer numbers and have been for a long time. And that will probably continue until 2060, and then it'll be some shifts, but, you know, so you have a large group, so if it's a little group, they're not really moving the needle that way. So Protestant, a lot of people, and they had this ethic that they, especially those who were Calvinists, that they wanted to assure themselves a place in heaven, so they wanted to work really hard and reinvest and get capitalism off to a good start. Any questions about that video? Okay, I think I summarized it. Okay, so that's the first contribution by Vic. The second, I know he had a lot. The other one is something that we deal with every day. Right? We don't deal with, you know, Calvinism every day unless you're a Calvinist, right? But the other major contribution that we're going to talk about in this class, and we'll talk about it in more detail when we get to groups and organizations, is what he saw was changes in society, or what he called the rationalization of society. He saw society becoming more complex after industrialization. He saw society becoming more chaotic. And he thought it was important to address the issues of rationalization. Just like Comp talked about, rationalization means a search for efficiency. The more rational, the more efficient. The less rational, the less efficient. He thought it was important to come up with some kind of way of managing the complexity of this emerging industrial society. So out of rationalization came what he called the bureaucracy. Sorry. We deal with bureaucracies every day. Here at the university, financial aid, admissions, advising, right? You deal with it at DMV, you deal with it at hospitals, you deal with it in any kind of organization. When we get to the chapter on groups and organizations, we'll talk more about what constitutes an organization. So essentially, he thinks society is getting more complex, more formal, it needs to be managed because it's becoming inefficient to manage all this complexity. And he calls this form of organizational management the bureaucracy. So we're going to briefly touch on the major aspects of a bureaucracy, or what he called an ideal bureaucracy, and then we'll talk about it in more detail in a couple of days. We'll have 10 minutes. We hopefully get through it. But you are responsible for all the reading in chapter 1. The more we cover, the easier it will be. Only one chapter. That's about as easy as it gets. So that won't be the case going forward. Just this is a important introductory chapter. But after this, it should be 3 to 4 chapters. Anyway, everybody caught up? Again, right out of the textbook. All right, so first aspect of an ideal bureaucracy, division of labor. Now, if you read the textbook carefully, you notice that Durkheim also talked about division of labor. Don't be confused. They both talked about it. What that means is, just in the interest of time, specialization. If you want to understand division of labor, you need to understand the term specialization. That everybody is specialized, and that should be the most efficient way of doing things. So if I have graduate training in sociology, you don't see me reading out of the book. I can do this from experience. But if they ask me to walk into an organic chemistry class because someone was out sick, here, you're a professor, you go teach that class, and I'm not specialized in it, it wouldn't go well. I can tell you that right now, right? I could fake my way through about 5 minutes of it, and the rest I'd be reading out of the book. That wouldn't be the most efficient way of teaching, right? So there's specialization. Second is hierarchy of authority. Everyone in an organization should be accountable to someone above them, all the way to the top of the organization. Everyone in an organization should have someone to whom they're accountable, all the way to the top of the organization. That makes things efficient and less chaotic. The third is written rules and regulations. The more written rules and regulations, the more efficient Weber believed the organization would be. And again, we'll talk more about it. Fourth, impersonality. Do not have a relationship with people with whom you work. Either a family relationship or a romantic relationship. It leads to inefficiencies and chaos. And fifth, employment based upon technical qualification. The first person to walk into an interview that you're giving, that you're looking for a network engineer for your security system, your network security, and the first person walks in and they're very pleasant, and they're humorous, and they're a nice person to have around, you shouldn't hire them for a network security job, because in the end it'll have a negative impact on the organization. You might want to go be friends with the person or hire them for something else, but you shouldn't hire them for something they're not technically qualified for. Any questions? No questions? Everybody's good? Give me another 30 seconds. Okay? Yeah.
I don't know if we have enough time to wrap on the previous slide.
You can come down after class. Okay, good? Next, we talk about the first female sociologist, Harriet Martineau. Where did we mention her name before? Where was she brought up before? Yes? She translated Comte's course on positive philosophy, right, from French to English, and then brought it around the world for other countries to learn about. But on her own right, she would be considered to be the first female sociologist. Even though she was French, she was born and educated in England, and she translated and presented Comte's work from French to English. Think about how different the world is today, bless you. It literally took a person a long period of time to translate work from one language to the other and then present it. Today it would be a few minutes at the most, right? A Google Translate and an email or a website or something like that, right? But back then it was a very different world. She was involved with her own conflict issues. She was considered to be a conflict theorist. You should be able to figure that out just from the topics that we're talking about. She was involved with feminist issues, with anti-slavery issues. She was involved with sociological research about neglected social institutions, the people in those neglected social institutions, and generally was considered not only the first female sociologist, but really one of the early feminist theorists. Any questions? You're just going to make it. We have one more theorist after this. Okay. So her main contribution that's known is working with Comte, but she was a very accomplished sociologist aside from that. Excuse me. Just all of this is covered one way or the other in the chapter. That's why I was hoping that you would come in with me. Any questions? All right, let's get through the last one, and anybody who misses anything can come down. The last of the theorists that we're going to talk about today in chapter 1 is W.E.B. Du Bois. Du Bois is the only American sociologist of this list, although we did talk about Berkeley, so that's not completely accurate. But Du Bois was an American sociologist, lives well into the 20th century. First African American to earn a doctorate from Harvard. And he was clearly a conflict theorist. We talked about him on the list of conflict theorists. And his best known theory is that of double consciousness. It's the idea that African Americans were not able to have just one consciousness or one identity. They always had to have two. He was involved with the Niagara movement. He was involved with disagreeing with Booker T. Washington's Atlanta Compromise, if you remember that from high school. Oops. And he was one of the founding members of the NAACP. We'll talk more about the voice discourse as well. So we've gotten through everything that I wanted to get through. You are responsible for reading the entire chapter, but most of the questions will come from the things that we've covered together. It's already written, so it's 40 multiple choice and true false questions. If you've been here, if you've been reading, if you've been paying attention, you should do very well. If you've done none of those things, you should not do very well. Yes? Yes, Dr. Wu. We'll get to chapter 2 as soon as we're done. So we've got an exam on Monday. We'll start with chapter 4 on Wednesday. So if you've already read it, you have a freer weekend. Yes?
So chapter 2 will be tested in the
Next exam. Yeah. Any other questions? Please be on time. Please go to the bathroom before you come in. Please be ready.